From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
But also, as you may know, this program is part of a series of webinars connected with the library's exhibition, Echoes of the Great War, American Experiences of World War I, which is on view here through January 2019. Today's presentation will last approximately 30 minutes, with time after that for our presenter to answer questions. You can communicate with me and with Katherine Blood, our presenter, via the chat. Well, and unfortunately, it looks like not with your fellow participants, but as I said before we began, you're welcome to send me a note and I'll share it out. I'll collect questions as well for Katherine on the chat, and we'll share them with her at the end of the session. So please think about what you'd like to ask her as the session goes on. We will post the recording of this presentation to the library's website once it has been captioned. And with that, I will introduce Katherine. So today's presenter is curator Katherine Blood, who works with the library's world-class collections of artists' prints, drawings, and posters in its prints and photographs division. And Katherine, I'm make you the presenter now. Her exhibition and publications projects have specialized in modern to contemporary graphic art by American, Hispanic, and Japanese artists. Today's webinar is based on a public gallery talk that Katherine gave earlier this year as part of our programming for the Echoes exhibit. Katherine, thanks so much for leading today's webinar.
Thank you, Naomi, and to everyone joining us today. As Naomi mentioned, today's discussion is based on a gallery talk I gave earlier this year focusing on one particular World War I drawing by artist Joseph Pennell. And we'll be looking closely at this in a minute, but let's start by thinking a little bit about visual communication at the time. When the U.S. entered the war on April 6, 1917, there was a thriving visual culture in full swing. For example, images were circulating widely in illustrated magazines and newspapers, and photography was well established by this time, with more and more people taking pictures with their own personal cameras. But World War I marked a notable leap forward in the history of visual communication, and this was thanks in large part to the extraordinary proliferation of war posters and other images made by some of the best artists of the day, and also the volume at which they were produced and ways they were disseminated. On screen are some examples from the library's extensive collection, and you can see they were tilted at getting audiences to feel, respond, and act or participate in various ways. And while many of the images appealed to notions of patriotism, honor, and courage, others tapped into fear and hatred of the enemy. Some of the major recurring themes include recruitment, like the first several examples here in the top row, also bond drives to raise funds in support of the war, home front service, and various forms of troop support, from knitting to donating books for soldiers' camp libraries. That's one of my favorites in the second row, the second one in, by Charles Buckles Falls. And you can explore over 1,900 World War I posters in the library's online catalog, and we'll show you where you can search for and study them in a little while. Everything you'll see on screen today, with one exception that I'll point out, comes from the library's collection of original artist prints, posters, drawings, and photographs. Today, we're going to be taking a deep look at an indelible and famous artwork by American artist Joseph Pennell. The Library of Congress is fortunate to preserve both Pennell's concept drawing, which we see on the left, and his related Liberty Bond poster, of which over 500,000 copies were printed in 1918. We'll also take a look at some of the broader contexts and forces that came together in launching a virtual armada of compelling wartime posters, including this well-known example. As a gateway for that discussion, here's how the drawing was presented in the physical exhibition, the Echoes exhibition, where it hung alongside some excellent company. That's Cheryl Regan gazing up at the artwork. She's our Echoes exhibit director, and let me also credit our lead curators for that show, Ryan Reft and Sar Conway Lands, who worked with a large team, including myself. If you look at the wall behind Cheryl, you may spot some familiar faces, and perhaps this one in particular. James Montgomery Flagg's I Want You for U.S. Army, with his truly iconic Uncle Sam, based, according to the artist, on his own face. Both Pennell and Flagg were among the many artists to contribute their work for the Division of Pictorial Publicity within Woodrow Wilson's Committee on Public Information. It was this man, George Creel, who headed the committee. He was a journalist and politician who believed that art could play a crucial role in winning the hearts and minds of the American public to build support behind the war. And his idea was that whereas people might miss or bypass text or films or community meetings, even the most indifferent eye, and that's his phrase, even the most indifferent eye could not fail to encounter posters and billboards. In his project memoir called How We Advertised America, Creel stressed that he was after no less than the very best work by the best artists, and in his words, quote, posters into which the masters of the pen and brush had poured heart and soul as well as genius. And he continues, looking the field over, we decided upon Charles Dana Gibson as the man best fitted to lead the army of artists. I like that he thought of them as an army. And on April 17th, 1917, the splendid American entered the service as a volunteer, end quote. So that would have been just a little over a week after America entered the war on April 6th. And Creel made a very savvy choice when he tapped Charles Dana Gibson to run the committee's division of pictorial publicity. Gibson was very popular, a leading and well-connected illustrator, celebrated for his creation of the Gibson Girl, and you can see a classic example of that top left. As president of the Society of American Illustrators, Gibson was well placed to rally the troops, the artist troops, and when he famously urged his fellow artists to draw till it hurts in support of the war, he was talking to such peers as James Montgomery Flagg, Howard Chandler Christie, Edward Penfield, Joseph Pennell, and many others. By January of 1918, Gibson reported that the artists were meeting every Friday at their New York headquarters on Fifth Avenue to review projects submitted by different government departments. Afterwards, Gibson said they adjourned to Keene's Chop House for dinner. The ranks swelled to 300 volunteer artists who produced more than 1,400 designs, including some 700 posters that were spread throughout the country, and they were everywhere, on the street, in offices, schools, theaters, libraries, streetcars, shop windows, and other public spaces. So in the flow of your daily life, you would have inevitably encountered these images. And we have some great period photo documentation of the posters in situ, like the image we were just looking at of the billboard in the street and this scene from a naval recruiting office. And just look at all of the posters plastered on the surrounding walls. Many of these are represented in the library's collection of original World War I posters. And if you'll just take a second and kind of memorize those back walls and hold those images in your mind, I'll show you a few closer color images of the posters from our collection, including Howard Chandler Christie's classic, "Gee, I wish I were a man, I'd join the Navy." When Pennell joined the Division of Pictorial Publicity as an associate chairman, he was about 60 years old, so a mature, successful artist who, like Gibson and Flagg, had helped define what would be known as the golden age of illustration from the 1880s to the 1920s, and this is square during Pennell's active years. He was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in 1857, and he trained at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts and the Pennsylvania School of Industrial Art. He later taught at the National Academy of Design and the Art Students League in New York City. Pennell died in Brooklyn, New York in 1926. This pictorialist-style portrait shows him in 1922 when he was in his mid-60s. During his long career, Pennell gained acclaim for his work as an illustrator and printmaker. He published treatises about drawing and printmaking and taught, lectured, and exhibited widely. He was a prolific illustrator of journal articles and books by the likes of Henry James, Washington Irving, and William Dean Howells. On screen is one of the drawings he made for Henry James' 1909 book, Italian Hours. Pennell and his journalist wife, Elizabeth Robbins Pennell, often collaborated together. She would do the writing and he would illustrate. And they were also devotees, friends, and biographers of James McNeill Whistler. Early on, as you can see in this drawing, Pennell's work shows the clear influence of Whistler. This is an early portrait drawing by Pennell of his wife in Rome in 1885. The Pennells liked to live in high-rise apartments with sweeping views where Pennell could make drawings like the delicate water color you see here called Out of My London Window. Pennell was also one of the early artists to depict skyscrapers as fine art subjects beginning around 1904. And here's his drawing of the Flatiron Building in 1908, only 6 years after it was built. This opalescent sunset watercolor on the right shows the stunning view from their Brooklyn home. They made the move from Philadelphia to Brooklyn in 1921. And you may be able to see a bit sketchily in the distance on the left, there's the Statue of Liberty under the clouds. Pennell is often called the Dean of American printmaking, and he was a skillful, accomplished lithographer and etcher who had a lifelong fascination with industrial subjects, a theme he called the wonder of work. And by this he meant pictures of architecture, engineering, construction, all kinds of industry. He found these subjects profoundly compelling and became gifted at presenting them as picturesque, an idea that was traditionally associated with artists' renderings of nature and beautiful landscapes rather than urban cityscapes. So here we see a Chicago skyline, the Standard Oil Building in New York, and a dramatic rendering of a grain elevator in Hamburg, Germany. This lithograph is from Pennell's celebrated series documenting the construction of the Panama Canal. And images of people are somewhat rare in his work and usually in service to the larger composition to indicate scale or bustling activity. Though Pennell considered this grouping of workers particularly decorative, it was based on an eyewitness moment. When the Panama Pacific International Exhibition was mounted in 1915 to celebrate the opening of the Panama Canal, Pennell chaired a juried exhibition of over 2,000 prints, and he had a room dedicated to some 150 of his own. And here he is looking very intrepid at the construction site, and that little sign is basically saying that you walk here at your own peril. And here are a couple more images showing Pennell in action. These were both taken at the Chicago stockyards around 1918. One shows Pennell surrounded by a crowd near what looks like a warehouse, and the other, he's sitting on a balcony, and he seems to have had a sketchbook with him always. Many portraits of him show him clutching a sketchbook. Our collection also has many examples of his sketchbooks. By the time Pennell came to the Division of Pictorial Publicity in 1917, he had already built strong credentials and a solid body of artworks documenting war preparation in England, which was his home base with his wife for many years. On screen from left to right are lithographs from his series of war work in England, first in England and then America. It's fascinating to note that Pennell was raised as a Quaker and was personally opposed to war. But for his ongoing exploration of this wonder of work theme, the chance to document war preparation was the opportunity of a lifetime. It was irresistible to him. With government backing in both England and America, Pennell was granted special access to sensitive sites, including shipyards and munitions factories. And here's a close-up detail of the censor stamp from the verso of Pennell's Submarines in Dry Dock. The stamp is on the left, showing that the artwork had passed scrutiny by the Philadelphia Navy Yard censor on November 7th, 1917, and that Pennell was not giving away any state secrets by distributing this image. And Pennell was vocal. He made no bones about this tension between abhorring war and being enthralled by its technology and scale. Pennell's wartime artworks were exhibited at multiple venues, including the Brooklyn Museum in 1917, where the accompanying catalog boasted introductions by H.G. Wells and Pennell. And here are quotes from both. To me, I think Wells really reflected the work well and understood what Pennell was after. The full quote's on screen, but I'll just read the last bit. This is on the right. Quote, "He gives us the splendors and immensities of forge and gun pit, furnace and mine shaft. He shows you how great they are and how terrible." And for his part, Pennell's quote on the left expresses his ambivalence. He wrote, "It is the working of the great machinery in the great mills which I find so inspiring, so impressive. And if only the engines turned out were engines of peace, how much better would the world be?" Now, this is the first of 2 Liberty Loan posters Pennell designed. This one was for the 3rd Liberty Loan. The Washington Post and the New York Times on March 10, 1918, both published articles that reported a planned 9 million posters were to be designed and distributed by various artists, and they would be distributed in the U.S., Hawaii, Alaska, Puerto Rico, Cuba, the Philippines, and France. There were 4 Liberty bond drives that by the end of the war had raised more than $17 million, and that was just an unheard of figure at the time. And here's an extraordinary statistic. Out of an estimated 24 million households at the time, some 20 million individuals bought Liberty war bonds. This poster is a classic example of Pennell's work, which typically combined the documentary with the picturesque, but still firmly based in eyewitness observation. His next design, for the 4th Liberty Loan poster, was an entirely different animal and a real departure for Pennell. It depicts an horrific scene with the Statue of Liberty in ruins and New York City in flames while under attack by enemy planes. His idea was to show, quote, New York City bombed, shot down, burning, blown up by an enemy. A fleet of airplanes fly over lower Manhattan, flames and smoke envelop the burning skyscrapers. In the foreground, Liberty, from a pile of ruins, rises headless on her pedestal, her torch shattered, end quote. So it's a little difficult to see the planes unless you're in the presence of the original drawing, though they are clearly visible in the printed poster. And here are details from both the drawing up top. The planes in sort of faint light blue are marked by the blue arrow, and I hope you can see them descending down diagonally toward the left. The poster detail below, they're much clearer. Within the conflagration, other details emerge, including a submarine heading toward the city skyline with a sagging bridge in the distance and poor Liberty's disembodied head nearby. We also see sunken or sinking ships with the American flag beginning to go underwater. The lower margin of the drawing shows Pennell's title and signature, indicates his dual role as draftsman and printmaker, and is annotated in his hand, watercolor sketch of idea. But the actual spark came earlier. Pennell gave a detailed account of the project in his 1918 book called Joseph Pennell's Liberty Loan Poster. And in it, he describes making the initial sketch pictured on the left as reproduced from this book, while riding the train back from a New York meeting of the Committee on Public Information. And you can see he's laid in some color indications like red in the sky. Once he arrived home in Philadelphia, Pennell made another drawing, which he then worked up into a lithographic print. And this is the image that you see here on the right. And Pennell wrote that this is the design he submitted successfully for jury selection. News coverage at the time reported that Pennell's was one of 10 artists' designs chosen, and that 10 million posters would be printed altogether. Over 500,000 copies were to be made of Pennell's poster alone. The library's collection includes some 30 examples of Pennell's working materials for the poster, and so far, that initial train sketch on the left, which I've reproduced from the book I mentioned, has not been located in our collection. I'm holding out hope, and if anyone runs across it, please let us know. We do have the drawing and resulting lithograph shown on the right. We also have this sketchbook. It's small, it's a little sketchbook in which Pennell was apparently trying out titles. And the wording he later settled on was, his idea was to say, now remember the scene of conflagration, buy Liberty bonds or you will see this. So this was later softened to a more poetic alternative for the printed color poster, as we'll see. Based on the available evidence and in studying the original artworks themselves, the sequence starts in black and white with the train sketch first, followed by the worked up drawing and lithograph, and then on to full color. On the far left is a proof of the black and white lithograph with lavish watercolor added by hand. It looks like a drawing almost. Next is Pennell's full-scale watercolor drawing, for which the title differed somewhat from the final poster. So, lest Liberty perish from the face of the earth became That Liberty Shall Not Perish from the Earth by Liberty Bonds. Furthermore, and far less well known, Pennell explored a similar concept in a second drawing dated July 4th, 1918, which moves the venue from New York to Philadelphia. The drawings are of comparable size and made in similar style and color palette and similar media. The violence, in my eyes, is intensified by adding a terrified crowd running in front of Independence Hall and a prone figure bleeding in the foreground. I've not found much in the way of discussion or explanation for this Philadelphia version, but both drawings are listed in the unpublished catalog raisonné of Pennell's drawings and paintings by Louis A. Werth, and that's W-U-E-R-T-H, under the heading War Poster Drawings. As I've mentioned, these phantasmagorical images were extremely unusual for Pennell, very specific to their purpose and time. There's a well-known story about a meeting of the National Arts Club in 1920, not long after the war, during which Pennell took artist George Bellows to task on the issue of authenticity. He singled out Bellows' image showing the execution of British Red Cross nurse Edith Cavell, who helped Allied prisoners escape during the war, saying that the work would be much more compelling and truly authentic if Bellows had seen the event with his own eyes. Bellows' rejoinder was that it was true. He had not seen the event, but nor, as far as he knew, had Leonardo been present at the Last Supper. On screen is Bellows' dramatic lithograph, and he also made a large-scale painting, which envisions an angelic Edith Cavell descending a staircase while a firing squad waits in the shadows below at the lower right corner. And of course, this argument, Pennell's argument, becomes somewhat ironic in light of the Liberty Bond poster designs we have been looking at, but they are certainly an anomaly in Pennell's broader body of work. Right up until his death in 1926, Pennell continued making prints and drawings based on eyewitness observation and reflecting a changing world. During this late period, he made a series of beautiful watercolor drawings. You saw this one earlier, and it's another one of my very favorites. But he made hundreds of them, and they're incredibly beautiful. He seems to have been making them really for his own pleasure. And they're capturing, many of them, the changing light, weather, and activity on the East River, which he could see from his Brooklyn apartment, High Point. And as the Bellows story suggests, I think it must be said that anyone who studies Pennell in any depth will bump up against his notoriously argumentative, difficult, and sometimes vituperative nature. And this was remarkable enough that it is mentioned in his obituaries, along with long lists of honors and achievements, including his tireless, passionate, constant advocacy of art and artists. Pennell really gave his life to this, and he left his entire estate to the Library of Congress. So we have an extraordinary opportunity to study a virtually complete collection of his lithographs and etchings, about 1,900 altogether, about 4,000 of his drawings, his publications and papers, along with his wife's, their substantial collections, a collection of James McNeill Whistler art, papers, and ephemera, and Elizabeth Robbins Pennell's rare cookbook collection. We also have the Pennell Library. And as we've seen, Pennell's artwork reflects how he moved through history and art history in ways that uniquely reflect the First World War, as well as the construction of the Panama Canal, the rise of American cities, and other key subjects. So we would like to leave you with some resources, beginning with the exhibition website for our current show, Echoes of the Great War, and also the art-centric exhibition I recently co-curated with my colleagues Sarah Duke and Betsy Nahum Miller. It's called World War I, American Artists View the Great War. All of the exhibit text and images are online via the link on screen, www.loc.gov/exhibits. And here's I'm skipping ahead. You can also explore over 1,900 digitized World War I posters, as we mentioned, in our online catalog at this direct link, and of course in person in the Library of Congress Prints and Photographs Division Reading Room. Here's a select bibliography of resources, including Creel's book about the Committee on Public Information, which I found very valuable during World War I, and some key resources for studying Pennell and his prints and drawings, which are also searchable in the library's online catalog at www.loc.gov/pictures, and available for study, of course, in our reading room, along with over 76,000 photographs, prints, and drawings related to World War I. You can also send us reference questions at this Ask a Librarian link on screen. So thank you so much for joining us today, and I'll hand things back to Naomi before we take questions.
Great. Thanks so much, Katherine. Really beautiful and fascinating works. We'd love to have you guys share some questions that Katherine can answer if you have them. But before, while we wait for your questions, I have one myself, which is, so you mentioned that Pennell offered the library his entire estate. Can you talk more about his relationship with the Library of Congress, and why did he choose to have his works kept here?
So our best clue comes from his wife's biography of her husband, The Life and Letters of Joseph Pennell. And it turns out that their estate was headed to the New York Public Library, which also a very wonderful home. But according to Elizabeth Robbins Pennell, after seeing the library's print room, Pennell decided he considered it the finest anywhere. This is Pennell, the finest anywhere, and still somewhat in need of more fine print. So he saw a need. And around 1917, he made a new will in favor of the library. And she wrote that, according to his wife, Pennell liked the idea of placing his legacy in the nation's capital and in a national institution. So that's the short answer.
Okay, thanks. Again, let us know if you have questions, but I'll ask one more, which is that, could you talk a little bit more about the Liberty Bond drives? And I'm not sure if you shared the statistic that you and I talked about the number of households in the U.S. As compared to how many participated in the bond drives. But if you haven't, it'd be great to say or to reiterate if you did, and then also tell us a little bit more about the drives.
Well, so let me just sort of give the basic sort of definition, which is that, so they were essentially, so by buying a war bond, it meant that you were essentially loaning money to the U.S. government in support of the war, with the funds to be returned at a later date. And this was framed as a patriotic duty for every citizen, from children to millionaires. Everyone was expected to step up. The bonds were sold in denominations going as low as $50, and you could also buy stamps for just 25 cents. And buyers were given buttons, sort of, I think of them sort of like our I voted stickers today, to show participation and encourage others to join in. And let's see, the program was initiated by Treasury Secretary William McAdoo, and the bonds were promoted by major celebrities of the day like Charlie Chaplin and Mary Pickford. And that statistic is really incredible. So altogether, they had raised more than $17 million, the 4 Liberty Bond drives, by the end of the war. And out of an estimated 24 million households at the time, some 20 million individuals bought Liberty War bonds. So wildly successful campaign.
All right, thank you. So I haven't seen any other questions, so I guess we'll close out today's session. I do want to remind everyone that this is part of the series. There'll be one more of these webinars on World War I. Oh, we do have a question from Tim Garrity.
Okay.
So he says, how does Pennell's work compare with the work of other World War I era artists in other nations like Britain, Germany, France, and Russia? Are there major differences?
So I think that you can compare Pennell's work to British artists like Muirhead Bone. I think his work is sort of representative, picturesque, is something that had fellow comparisons in Europe and certainly in England. And of course, although he felt very much an American, he spent a lot of time in Britain and was also an Anglophile. So I can mention a few of the British artists. I mentioned Muirhead Bone, James McBay, and also extremely influential artists who worked with the British government Dutch artist Louis Ramekers, whose images illustrated the Bryce Report of reported German atrocities. So that's a great question. I could go on, but that's essential. That's an essential answer.
Okay, great. So another question. This is from Ruth. She said, you pointed to the departure from Pennell's typical style in that Less Liberty Parish departs from his typical style. So can you talk a little bit more about why he made that departure?
So I would love to know why, and I've looked for clues in his letters, and I've looked for, and I mean, I don't know why. I think that he was responding to something very specific, very. If I'm allowed to conjecture a little bit, I think a lot about this sort of tension between his being a pacifist and his being so engaged and compelled by the technology of war. I know he was distressed, disturbed, so he just chose a very, what's the word I want? Histrionic isn't the word I'm groping for, but it's an extreme response. And there are other comparable posters in our collection. On that very first slide that I showed, there's a poster by John Norton, Keep These Off USA, which shows bloodied German soldier boots. So it's it's a tone that was used by more than one artist to sort of show how vital it was to be engaged in these Liberty Loan bond drives in no uncertain terms.
All right. Well, one last comment that may lead to a question, actually. So Jerry said that the poster depicting the young woman in a Navy uniform was still in use by the Navy when I was in the service in the 1970s.
Oh, wow.
Which is interesting, but it also makes me wonder if you might speak a little bit about sort of the legacy either of some of the images that come out of the Committee on Public Information in World War I, or just a bit about the growth of marketing after the war as a result. Sort of what's the legacy of these images and the effort around them?
So there's a really great example to sort of cite in answering that question. James Montgomery Flagg's Uncle Sam, I Want You for U.S. Army, was repurposed, was so powerful it was repurposed during World War II. And if you go to our online catalog, you can see the different versions, and one of them also includes a portrait of FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. So I think what happened was the World War I posters, the Division of Pictorial Publicity, this extraordinary phenomenon, which was even considered by artists and critics at the time, there was a self-awareness that something special was going on, that something new was happening, and that they were moving the equation forward and opening the door. And I think it was one in a series of information revolutions. I think you could look at it that way, that really things were moved forward in a way and that opened the door for the future.
All right. Well, thanks for that, and thank you for this wonderful presentation. So I'll wrap up with a few notes. One is that, as I was saying earlier, this is part of a series, and so we'll have one more webinar that will be on December 12th at 2 o'clock Eastern. The exhibition co-curator, Ryan Reft of the Manuscript Division, will discuss Charles Hamilton Houston's wartime service and experiences as a young officer serving in a segregated military, and the influence of those experiences on his later work in civil rights, including as chief attorney for the NAACP and a mentor to Thurgood Marshall. This is also was previously a gallery talk, and like Katherine's, a wonderful one. So I hope you'll join us for that last of our webinar series. Today, as you may know, is Giving Tuesday, so in that spirit, I'd like to just share that some of our programs here are made possible by donations and gifts from generous citizens. So the Librarian of Congress has introduced a new initiative that is called To Spark a Lifelong Adventure of Learning. If you'd like to learn more or support this effort, you can go to loc.gov/donate. And finally, we'd love to know what you thought of today's session. If you can share your comments on the survey, we'd very much appreciate it. And Cynthia, I see you have a question. Oh, thank you. We appreciate your participation in the webinar today. And again, you'll find the recording on the World War I exhibition website and also the library's YouTube channel once it has been properly captioned, which should be in a few weeks. So thank you all so much for participating.
Thank you.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.